Good morning or good afternoon, depending on when you watch this particular video. I thought I would go ahead and talk a little bit about MLA, parenthetical slash in-text slash documentation, especially as it sort of relates to your research paper that, over the next few weeks, obviously, you need to be drafting and finalizing and using your six scholarly sources, right? Your two scholarly books, your two scholarly journal articles. Those four sources you should be able to find and need to find um, from either your public library or the closest Coastal Pines Technical College library. Your other two sources will come from two scholarly websites. And again, talking about the scholarly websites, if you watched any of the virtual library orientation videos that Lorna and I had about a week or so ago, she talks about this thing called the CRAP test, where you're sort of going through and looking at the credibility, the reliability of a particular source. And that particular the CRAP test method will work for any source, not just for web sources. It'll work for the stuff on Galileo, and some of the various databases that the public library or your college library will offer. Generally, the sources you will find, on Galileo, at a public library, at a college library, are pretty much, for the most part, are going to be credible sources. I mean, you have some of those print magazines or some of those popular magazines or newspapers that you still have to sort of do the CRAP test to. Websites, you have to be careful. Usually anything .org, .gov, .edu will be a little bit more reputable than the .com sites. That's not to say that you can't use .com sites, but you probably want to be a little bit more skeptical when you're using .com based on the information they provide, because anybody that knows how to type and spell can go in there. We see that with Wikipedia. That's why Wikipedia is not really a good source to use for any type of research paper. It's good to go and read the articles to get a gist of maybe what you're trying to say or what you're trying to do. Usually, if that Wikipedia page is well written, there's going to be like footnotes, little numbers next to certain words and that type of stuff that will sort of piggyback down to their reference page or their Works Cited page, where they're going to list where they're getting their information. Now, with that, sometimes you have hyperlinks, and you can click on those hyperlinks, and it will take you to scholarly stuff, journal articles and books and that type deal. But you can't use the information you actually find inside of a Wikipedia web page. It's just not credible enough. Again, anybody can go on there and hit edit and change it if they know what they're doing. There's just no way to check anybody's credibility. Even though it may sound good, it may read good, it may be long enough, whatever the case may be, you just really can't use Wikipedia. You want to be careful about what you see and hear off of social media. Some folks like to try to cite stuff off of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever kind of social media account that you may or may have out there, or somebody has out there. Just be unless they're 100% an expert, like a doctor, or have some sort of master's or some sort of degree in that particular field, you just don't want to quote and use some yahoo that really is just spouting off at the mouth and don't really know any more than you about your particular topic. So you want to be careful with that. So basically what I'm going to talk about today really is how to integrate. There's about 8 different methods. There's probably a little bit more, but that usually the 8 that we see in academic writing, how to cite, how to quote, how to paraphrase, that type stuff. Once you start getting your 6 sources, you're thoroughly reading through them, you're selecting the stuff that you want to use out. And what I would suggest, since you have 6 sources, or should have 6 sources, I would probably at least pick 2 passages or 2 sentences or 2 things that you want to quote out from each one of these sources. Now, again, you can either directly quote, you can paraphrase, you can summarize. I would probably try to use each one of those 3 different methods just to spice up your writing a little bit. So you're taking two things that you want to use out of source 1, source 2, source 3, source 4, source 5, source 6. So after you read through everything, take your own notes and highlight the passages that you want to lift out, you should have 12 things that you want to sort of put in your paper to support your main arguments, your main points, your thesis statement. That's where the research is coming in. But again, the key word is research. If you do not use in-text citation or parenthetical citation, you're not writing a research paper, and you're going to lose a good chunk of your grade. I see the other common flaw that I see with this paper is they list all these sources on their Works Cited page, but they don't quote, they don't paraphrase, they don't summarize. Again, you're not using research if you're not actually putting the stuff in and quoting it and documenting it properly throughout the body of your essay. Just giving me a list of 6 or 7 sources on the Works Cited page is just telling me, hey, you looked at them, but you're not actually utilizing them in the first 5 pages of your paper or the first 7 pages of your paper. So whatever is on your Works Cited page, you need to be able to integrate either by directly quoting, summarizing, paraphrasing, and properly do it the document style MLA in text throughout the body of your essay. If you're not doing that, that's usually a big red flag for plagiarism. And being that this paper is going to be due, about a week before the semester ends, there's just not a lot of error for you to get a 0 on this if you, intentionally or unintentionally, because the rule states in the policy, you plagiarize 1 time, you get a 0. You do it 2 times, you fail the course automatically. So if you're unsure about how to quote, how to paraphrase, how to summarize, you need to start sending rough drafts of your research paper as quickly as possible. Not only to me, but the smart thinking. You need to do it multiple times if it comes up down to it, because nobody can really afford a 0, this late in the game. Because if you looked at some of the emails I sent out over the weekend, we may only have 5 or 6 assignments left. So a 0 at this point, with the research paper being about 25% of your grade, which is a big chunk, meaning if you get a 0 on it, it's probably going to bring you down at least 3 letter grades. So if you have an A, well, going into the final, you'll probably have a D if you made a 0 on it. If you have a B going into the final, you'll probably be failing the class. So you want to be extremely careful about how to go about citing and documenting this stuff. And when I say 6 to 8 pages, I really mean 6 to 8 pages. I don't mean 4 pages. I don't mean 2 pages. I don't mean 15 pages. I mean between 6 and 8. If your whole goal is, hey, I don't like to write, I got too much stuff going on, give me 6 pages. So when you end on page 6, I mean 6 full pages. So when you end on page 6, your Works Cited page begins on page 7, not at the end of page 6. If you end on page 8, your Works Cited page begins on page 9, not page 8. So just keep that in mind. The Works Cited page becomes a separate page on itself. I will look at a couple Works Cited generators that will be helpful, especially since you're having to do the annotated bib. Most of y'all should be wrapping up that research paper proposal that's going to be due tomorrow, right before the 11:59. That is sort of giving me a chance to see what you plan on doing in the actual research paper, what your topic is. It's really sort of like a green light. It's a check mark, hey, go ahead and continue finding your 6 sources so you can take the next couple weeks to do the annotated bibs. Which if you watched the video about the annotated bibs a week or so ago, watch that video if you haven't. If you need to go back and review it, please review it, because that tells you how to go about doing the annotated bibs. You can start sending drafts of those at any point as well. Because the proposal really is probably one of the easiest assignments we have in this class the whole semester. The actual annotated bib, I say, is not the most difficult. I mean, it is for some folks, but it's really more of a technical and specific. It can be challenging if you don't follow the format. That's why it's, equally important that you watch the video if you haven't watched the video, to be able to understand how to set the annotated bib up, because each part of the annotated bib, right, you have a citation and then you have your annotated paragraph. each one of those parts are almost worth 9 points apiece. So you have 6 of them that you have to do. So you can kind of do the math there, right? 18 times 6, or 16 and a third times 6 is basically, I guess that will get you your total to 100. So if you screw up on a citation, you're already down, 8.5 points almost. If you don't do, 6, if you don't, give me 6 annotations, right? With the citations dealing with your 6 sources, then, you're already losing. If you only give me 5 and don't give me 6, well, you're already losing nearly 17 points right off the bat. So you're 100 minus 17, bam. You're already at a low beat. So make sure that you don't wait until the last minute to do the annotated bibs. You're going to be foolish if you do, because they are specific in nature. I wouldn't say they're time consuming. They are. If you procrastinate, obviously you have to read through the sources to be able to answer those 4 questions on that assignment sheet that goes with the annotated bibs. So keep that in mind too. If you realize that your proposal has a set of 4 questions you have to answer, those same 4 questions are different than the 4 questions that are on the annotated bib sheet. So be careful that you're answering the correct questions for each one of the assignments, because you don't want to do your annotated bib based on the 4 questions for the proposal and vice versa. You don't want to do your proposal that's due tomorrow based on the annotated bib questions. So make sure that you're not confusing or mixing and matching those questions up. Again, if you have questions with either one of those assignments, please email me or watch the videos. That's the whole purpose of me recording these and uploading these videos, is for you to sort of watch and get a gist of what you need to do. Always, send stuff to Smart Thinking. They're usually pretty good about getting things back. I know getting close to the end of the semester, they cater to other colleges. So the longer you wait to submit stuff, it may not be, 6 hours before you get back. It could be 12 hours. It could be 2 days. So you want to be careful of that. So there's going to be a couple things I'm going to show you real quick. So let me share. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of this MLA stuff here. So let me bring this back over first. And I want to go all the way back to our main page. If you noticed, I went ahead and put little countdowns for us. It's not merely meant to make people panic. It's really sort of that motivation to get everybody in high gear. It will make you panic if you wait till the last minute to do any of these assignments, right? The proposal is due in 1 day and you have these hours, minutes, and seconds. Your annotated bib, you have a little bit of time. I'm giving you a good bit of time to do the annotated bib so you can go out to the library and get your 4 sources there, and also get your 2 sources from the internet so you can read through them thoroughly, take notes, annotate, get the citations in order, get your paragraphs in order so you can start, submitting drafts to me and Smart Thinking in a timely manner. That's going to be due, though, basically when we come back from Thanksgiving break. So I would say, as we get closer to Thanksgiving, I would try to have that, wrapped up, especially because I believe it's going to be due. I had to double check to see. I can probably see here momentarily. It's either going to be due the 29th or it's going to be due on the 1st. Again, it's going to be that week that we come back from Thanksgiving break. So what I've been usually telling my students in person and also my other virtual classes is, if you don't want to do anything for me over Thanksgiving break, because if you're online, we basically have from the 21st through the 28th off for Thanksgiving. If you don't want to do anything for me during Thanksgiving break, then you need to probably, wrap up at least your annotated bib stuff before Thanksgiving. And of course, Thanksgiving would be the 25th. You want to check if you need to go to the library to get some of your core sources, especially if you're going to a college library. You want to see what their hours of operation will be during that Thanksgiving week. I'm pretty sure everybody's going to be operating on normal business hours on Monday, the 22nd. The 23rd and the 24th are going to be dicey, so you want to check to see who's going to be open and when they're going to be closed. And I can tell you from the 25th to the 28th, all the colleges are going to be closed. So you don't really want to wait to get all your sources the week of Thanksgiving. I would say after turning your proposal in tomorrow, I would take, from the 11th probably through the 21st, just to get all your sources, to read them, to annotate them, and to start on this annotated bid project. Because if you wait until the last day or two before this is due, it's going to be a headache and it's going to be a pain in your butt. I'm warning you now. You don't want to wait on the annotated bids, because when you wait on that, it's going to make you wait on doing the research paper. And really, the research paper is going to be due in 26 days. If you're working smarter and not harder, I would try to start drafting that research paper, the week of Thanksgiving. Especially, if you're not traveling too much, you're not going out of town, give yourself a couple days to do, start, do a page here, do a page there, do a page here. So when we come back and you start finalizing this annotated bib to turn in, you can take the rest of that week to start sending me drafts if you haven't started sending drafts earlier. The whole point of me opening up some of these folders already was for you to sort of work ahead. You don't necessarily have to wait the deadlines to get stuff done, especially if you got 3 or 4 other classes and you got tests and papers and exams coming up on those. If you're a procrastinator, it's this last few weeks is probably not going to be too pretty for you. It's probably not going to be too good for your stress levels, your blood pressure, your health overall. So I see a lot of folks sort of get sick at this point because of the weather changing, the time changing, and everything else going on. Keep in mind, our semester ends at a certain point. So we have to keep going on. I pretty much have a head cold now that I've been sort of struggling through for the last week or so. My daughters and I guess, have been passing this back and forth. Sometimes you just got to, get in the trenches, and even when you're sick and you're hurt, you still got to sort of push through to get things done. So please do your best of doing that. Don't go off and for Thanksgiving break and get stuffed with a bunch of turkey and stuffing and then come back and just get lazy on me and just don't want to do anything, because these last 2 weeks, basically when we come back from Thanksgiving, they're going to really make or break your grade. They're going to determine whether you keep your A, whether you get your B, your C, your D, your F. It's really easy to get a D and an F if you just don't put any effort and don't do anything those last 2 weeks, really this last month. So be careful of that. Quiz 5, due in about 30 days. This quiz is basically your final quiz. It's not going to be over grammar. Quiz 4 was the last quiz that dealt with grammar. Quiz 5 is going to be dealing with some of the stuff I'm talking about now with the MLA documentation. If you look, I think I put it in the week 13. There's a study guide. Your quiz 5 is sort of going to be set up that way. I'm probably going to do, like true or false. It's probably going to be shorter than what you see, but that's a good study guide. I would work through that. Once you start getting answers and you need help checking, I will, give you the website to where you can find those answers, or I will, check them for you, whatever the case may be. But that's going to be really the final quiz. And if you look, I did send out an email maybe a week or so ago, and that deals with the final exam, which that's going to be due in 35 days. Roughly in 35 days. That's the last day you have to turn it in. So if you haven't checked that email or looked at that email about the ProctorU stuff, I sent out some, I think there was PowerPoints, there were some handouts, if you had an online course, let's say last semester or during the spring, then you know that any online course that you take from this college, there's a Proctor U event. Some instructors, schedule it around midterm. A lot of instructors like to do it around, the final exam. And basically, you have to set up your account. If you don't have an account set up, if you go back and look at some of that material that I sent out over the last couple of weeks, it will tell you how to go about setting up this Proctor U account. You need to make sure that you download that particular Proctor U app to the right browser. If you mix match browsers, it's not going to work. The setup is pretty easy. I mean, it's free. It's like, setting up like a Facebook or an email account. You're going to need a username and a password that you're going to have to remember. I don't have that information. The other thing that you're going to need is obviously you're going to need to have a working webcam and a working web mic. You're going to have a working updated Microsoft Word and computer. So make sure that all those updates for your computer and for your Microsoft Word program have all completed by the time we get to the final exam, because once you hit start on this exam, you're only going to have 60 minutes to type your essay. I'm going to give you a topic. If you look, there might be already a topic in the week 13 folder where it says essay 6. You click on that, it sort of tells you the topic. The thing with this particular essay 6 or the final exam essay, it's timed at 60 minutes. You have to type the essay from scratch, meaning you can't write a rough draft and bring it in. You can't upload a rough draft. You have to do it by scratch. Now, how do you go about doing that? Well, if you look at the topic for this particular essay, you can bring in any text. If you think some of the stuff that we've read over the last 14, 15 weeks would help you, the e-text, if you think that will help you, you can use that. Note cards, notes. What I would suggest, though, is that you probably make an outline of what you plan on typing in your essay prior to hitting begin on that Proctor U stuff, because once you hit begin, you're going to have to start typing, and you only have 1 hour to do it. Once the time limit expires, please save regularly, because if the time limit expires on you, meaning you run out of time, whatever you saved is what's going to send. So if you haven't saved anything or haven't typed anything, then you're just going to be sending a blank document, and I have to grade it as a 0 at that point. Because we don't have time for a redo, we don't have time for a remake or do-over. The final exam is final because it's basically due by 6 p.m. on our last day of the semester. Obviously, after you turn in your research paper, which I believe that's going to be due on Sunday, December 5th, you basically have from December 5th to December 14th to take your Proctor U final. So if you want to take it earlier and get done with it, then you're done with the class, because that's the only this is basically our last assignment is the Proctor U final exam. You probably want to come in with, using an outline for this paper. That'll keep you on track. You don't want to be outlining when you hit and start, because you're going to run out of time to try to outline it and, proofread, grammar check, spell check, and type the essay. Again, I think this particular essay only needs to be about 1 to 2 pages. So think about like a 5-paragraph essay for the final exam. That should be enough time, enough length that you can get everything done that you need to get done. Again, if you do not have working internet connections, if you don't have a working computer, if you know that your webcam or web mic are, just about fried, then what I suggest that you do is you're going to have to go to the closest Coastal Pines Technical College library/testing center to take this Proctor U final. You can use our equipment. You're still going to need to have a Proctor U account set up and ready to go. The only difference that may bring to you is if you work, you're going to have to, schedule time off, because the library and the testing center, depending on the Coastal Pines library or testing site that you're going to, their hours are going to vary. Meaning most places open from 8 to 6. So you won't have the benefit of taking that thing at 8 o'clock at night like some folks have who have a working cam and a working computer and all that stuff. So you're probably going to have to take it a little earlier. If you work, you may want to go ahead and start requesting for time off, because with COVID and we're still in the procedures of COVID, you're probably going to want to come, wear a mask. You probably want to give yourself at least 2 hours, about an hour of driving time, depending on where you're going, and then an actual hour time, probably 3 hours, because an hour time for driving back and forth to where you're going, and then an actual hour time taking the test. So, and keep in mind, depending on space, there may be other students, so there might be a waiting period. So you may think that you're coming in at 8 and thinking, hey, I'm going to be the first one in line. Well, you may be not able to take that exam until 10 o'clock because there's other people ahead of you. So just keep that in mind. We will talk a little bit more about this as it gets closer to that final exam week. But like I said, I can't stress it enough. Go back and look at some of the emails that I sent out about ProctorU over the last couple of weeks. Go through those, read those. The college is probably going to be sending out some stuff about ProctorU. If you already have a ProctorU account because you used it earlier this semester or last semester, whenever the case may be, just double check to make sure that your username and password is up to date so you can log in, that you're not having any issues. All right. So yeah, you can see here, this is the MLA quiz, final quiz study guide. Click on that. That will be helpful. So going back, this is really more or less motivation to get everybody sort of motivated, to keep everybody in track, to see, what is due, when it's due, that type deal. I will use, like I said, because you don't really have anything formally due after tomorrow until the annotated bib is due. So that's a point where I would say, don't get lazy. You still have stuff to do. Just because we're not turning something in this coming Sunday, you have stuff to do by going to the library, getting your 6 sources, reading those, start working on your annotated bibs, start working on drafting your research paper, start preparing and, going over some of the final quiz stuff. So you have enough to do in the next, 20 days. So again, he's not giving me anything this week, so I don't have to do anything. Don't get in that mentality, because if you do, you're going to screw yourself in the end. And your grade is going to drop in 22 days. I can guarantee that, if you start getting lazy right now. So please don't do that. Okay, so let me switch gears here and talk a little bit about what parenthetical documentation is. So as you can tell here, and I'm going to be going back and forth to a couple sites. Parenthetical documentation, for all students who are writing English and humanity papers, it is a way to give credit to your source within your paper, also known as in-text citations. Parenthetical means using parentheses. So why should students use it? Using MLA citations in your paper is required by the Modern Language Association, MLA. That's what it basically means. And all instructors, teachers, and professors are going to require you to use MLA if you are taking a humanities course. So English is a humanities course. Other courses such as psychology and education will ask you to use American Psychological Association, APA, which is a different setup and different style. So if you're using APA in another class, continue to use APA in another class. We're using only MLA. That's what we've been using since week 1, and that's what we're going to finalize the class with. Using MLA format ensures the reader that you are not plagiarizing any work. Again, first offense on plagiarism, 0. Second offense, you fail the course, and then you go before a panel at the board of directors here, the president of the college, vice president, that type stuff. And they really decide whether they want to just suspend you for a couple semesters, a year, or just flat out kick you out and tell you not to come back. And that stuff stays on your official transcript, by the way. So if you try to go somewhere else and hem and haw about why you only went 1 semester at a particular college, the only thing they need is your social security number and a phone number, and they can figure out why you got kicked out of college. So, I mean, just be wary of that. You are giving credit where credit is due for the ideas of other writers and researchers. So anytime that when you quote, paraphrase, summarize from your 6 sources in your paper, you're giving credit to that particular source, those particular authors, and it is the moral and ethical thing to do. You wouldn't want folks to go around and steal your stuff and say, hey, that they didn't write it. It was my idea. I did it. That's basically what you're getting at with this. Some things to kind of keep in mind, I guess a review of this, some folks are still having issues with this Microsoft template as it relates to the MLA. If you notice with your research paper, there's not going to be a title page. With APA papers, you have a title page. Don't give me a title page. That's just a wasted blank piece of paper basically for us. So if you give me a title page, I mean, I'm just going to mark a big X through it and throw that away because that's not telling me anything really. But the title of your paper, your name, which that's what the header is used for MLA. So keep in mind that you have the proper header, your first name, your last name, my name, the course, and the date that the actual assignment is due. I wouldn't give the date that you've been working on drafts. I would put the date that it's due because that's going to be a reminder of, hey, this is when it's actually going to be due. You want to make sure that each one of your pages top right hand corner has your last name, right? Smith, and 1. So when you go to page 5, I should see Smith 5. If you go to page 55, I should see Smith 55. Some of y'all are only doing this part and then you're just dropping off. It just says last name and gives me a page number. Well, that's not, it just says last name. It doesn't say your last name. Or you're not even doing this at all. And you're losing points that way because each time that you're not providing that, you're losing 2 points, so to speak. So if you have an 8-page paper and you're missing that 2 times, well, your grade goes from 100 minus 16. So you're basically at an 85, 84 just because you didn't follow the format. Same thing with the header here. There's 4 things you need. You only need it on page 1. I'm seeing folks that are having this same header on page 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I'm just sort of putting an X through it because you only need it on page 1. The other thing is you need a proper title for your essay. Some of y'all are not doing that. You're just leaving this part blank or calling it, essay 5 or whatever the case may be. Well, everybody has to write an essay, so I know it's essay 5, or I know it's a research paper. Your title needs to be brief, short, creative, and to the point. It basically informs your reader, aka me, or anybody else that picks up your paper, what what you plan on talking about possibly throughout your paper. It gives me sort of a glimpse. Like here, it's a really short title. It doesn't have to be a complete thought or sentence. You don't have to go for 4 sentences. Just give me a few words and make sure that it relates to the writing that's coming up. And then you just start, with the next paragraph, you indent. Every time you begin a new paragraph, you want to indent or tab once. Some of y'all are not even indenting anymore. And it's just cramming everything together, making it hard to read. We will talk a little bit about in-text citation. The Works Cited page, I will briefly talk about that. But again, if you use some of these Works Cited generators and follow those instructions, what they're giving you, the Works Cited stuff should work itself out as long as you understand and plug in the stuff they want. Works Cited page starts on a new page, source listed in alphabetical order by author's last name. You need to double space everything and use hanging indentation when needed. So if you only have 1 source, which in this case, this paper is going to have 6, but let's just say for essay 3 or essay 4, you only had 1, it should have only been Works Cited because you're only using 1 source. If you have multiple sources, which we're going to have at least 6 for the research paper, then you're going to use Works Cited, and it needs to be centered. Some of y'all are putting it over here. Some of y'all are putting it over on right line. It needs to be center of that page. It needs to follow the same Times New Roman 12. It doesn't need to be italicized, underlined, bold-faced. You don't need to capitalize the work and then lowercase the c. You don't need to capitalize C and lowercase the W. Make sure it looks just like this. That's all I'm wanting. And again, last name and page number. And then again, when you start here, there's only really, this is just a snippet, but it shows three sources. You will have 6, but again, if you look, it's going by author's last name, or if a particular source doesn't have an author, what it's doing is going by the title. So here, Blueprint would come before Dean. Dean would come before Ebert. So again, if you're using a Works Cited generator, a free one that you find online, and you plug in all those sources, one, if you look at, I think I showed it in that video about the annotated bibs. If not, I'll probably have to go back and quickly show you how to do that at some point. But if you're using a Works Cited generator for those 6 sources you plan on using in your paper for your annotated bib, because that's that whole point for that particular assignment, is you're finding those 6 sources, you're going through, these are the ones I want to use. Those Works Cited generators will put everything that you need in alphabetical order if you use them properly. And then you're just, in a lot of ways, getting rid of the paragraphs at the end and copy and paste and making that your Works Cited page. Again, I can show you that as it gets closer to when this actual research paper is being due. So just keep that in mind. If you're not using a Works Cited generator, then you're going to have to sort of do this old school, and it's a pain in the butt, and I'm going to show you that here in a minute. I'm not going to get into too much detail with that because it is a pain in the butt. I used the generators because I know 20 years ago when we didn't have them, we had to actually go through and do it the old school way, and it was, again, like I said, 20 years ago, still a pain in the butt. You're just going to have to remember your ABC order by author's last name, not first name, last name. So again, last name, comma first, last name, comma first. If you don't know your ABCs at this point, Google a chart that tells you what comes first. Everybody should have learned ABCs in kindergarten and first grade, so really that shouldn't be a problem, but you'd be surprised. I still have people that are 30, 40, and 50 years old that still think that D comes before C and Z comes before A. So if you're unsure about how to go about doing that, again, Google a chart. You'll find a first or second grade ABC chart that they're still using in classrooms that use that as a guide. Otherwise, I would use one of those Works Cited generators. All right. So let's see. And this is what I was meaning, old school. I mean, you're going to find stuff like this. If you Google it, it kind of tells you like containers and versions and numbers. And this is how you do it the old school way. Print type, electronic type, entire book, book chapter, edited book, anthology, magazine article, newspaper article, journal article, and it kind of tells you here what needs to go. Again, this can be time consuming, but there is a template. If you want to try your hand at old school, I can kind of send this particular template to you. For me, if if you want to make sure it's right and you want to do it quickly, I would probably use a Works Cited generator, honestly. If you notice too, hanging indent. If you look here at this particular example, when you have a Works Cited entry, your first line is never indented. You're always going to keep it left align. If you go beyond that first line, line 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth, you have to use what it's called hanging indentation for those particular lines. You could easily do like Control T, and that should do it. If you go to Microsoft Word and you go up to where it says paragraph here, and you go to special and hit hanging, it will do it for you. You're probably going to have to highlight those particular lines. If you only have one, if your citation is only one line long, then just keep it left align and don't do anything to it. Other things to sort of keep in mind, major title words are capitalized in your title. So again, if you don't know which words that you need to capitalize in your particular book title, journal title, website title, then you might want to look up your capitalization rules. We talked a little bit about these a couple weeks ago as either quiz 2 or quiz 3. But you want to double check to make sure that you're capitalizing the right words of your titles, because the only downfall to that works cited generator is that sometimes they don't capitalize the words that need to be capitalized. You're never underlining anything now. Even though we still have the underline feature, you want to put quotation marks go around book chapters, article titles, and web names. So make sure that you keep that in mind. It also goes around lyrics, songs, poetry, short stories, that type stuff. Italics are used instead of the underlining. Italics are used on books, magazines, newspapers, films, and journal titles, as well as database names. So keep in mind, because sometimes the works cited generators won't necessarily do that either. So that's just something that you're just going to have to be smart about, to go back and do a second check to make sure that everything is correct on those works cited generators. Let's see. So again, every in-text citation must correspond to a works cited entry. So whatever you quote, whatever you paraphrase, whatever you summarize in the body of your essay, there should be a works cited entry on the works cited page. If not, that sort of is a big red flag that somebody's plagiarizing the paper possibly. And when you submit it into the plagiarism checker, it's going to find it within, a few hours, probably less, couple seconds, couple minutes. That's why it's going to be important that you send drafts, multiple drafts, if you think you're going to have issues about citations, which a lot of folks, if this is your first college level academic research paper, you're probably going to be kind of worried about the citations. Am I doing this right? So, the earlier you can start sending Smart Thinking and Me drafts to check that stuff, the less heartache you may have if you don't do that and you submit your paper in, and the plagiarism program flags your 7-page paper and 60% of it is copied and paste from a website or a journal article. Well, I mean, that's telling me word for word, either you're not watching the videos, you didn't get help, obviously, you had nearly a month to send drafts and you didn't do it. So if you didn't send it to me, you didn't send it to Smart Thinking, and you probably didn't get help outside of that. So I'm just going to stop and just give you a 0, right? I'm going to have to move on. I got 4 or 5 other classes that have a research paper due about that week. I don't have time to go back and say, hey, I'll give you a couple days to fix this. I mean, plagiarism is plagiarism, and we've been talking about it really since week 1. So everybody knows the consequences. If you get caught, you get a 0, right? So please get the help if you don't know what you're doing. All right, so let's talk a little bit more. I'm going to switch gears here in a minute. We come back maybe to some of these, because there's some things that are just like here. This is what I'm talking about. This is another example, right? Works cited because there's more than one. Your last name and page number. This is usually what I see when you don't do that correctly. I don't know why that's still a problem, 13 weeks into the semester, but it is. Notice first lines are always left aligned. There's no, they're not hitting tab. They're not indenting here. When they go to the next line, 2, 3, they're doing the hanging indent. Quotation marks around titles that are shorter than a book, right? Because this is coming from a journal. This is actually coming from, this is a book of some sort because it's italicized. Notice ABC order again by author's last name. Andrews comes before Kingston. Kingston comes before Levitt. Levitt comes before Short. United States comes after. 1-inch margins all the way around, which when you open up your Microsoft Word, especially if you're using a more updated version of Microsoft Word, your margins should already be set at 1 inch, unless you went in and sort of changed them around yourself. If you did that, you might want to go back and make sure that everything is 1 inch around. All right. So let me bring this up here momentarily. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing just 1 second and I'll bring it back up. So this is sort of what I made early on today to kind of help everybody. Again, there's about eight. I have eight major methods of how to go about, citing and stuff when you start collecting your sources and see a couple sentences or a passage and say, hey, that's going to be really good addition to my research paper. I want to add that into my paper. There's a way to do it and do it properly without, losing points, without really jacking up your paper. Because, I mean, if you just sort of go about doing this stuff, rove, or you don't get help, or you really need help and to be able to understand this, but you're either too shy or don't want to have, take the time to go do it, and you just, basically slop together a research paper, and then obviously if it's slopped together, it's going to read and look like slop, and it's not going to help your grade. So that's sort of the reason why I'm doing this now, is to help everybody, especially as you get closer to the end of the month. You can go ahead and start drafting and revising your paper, which everybody wants to, I'm sure, get a good grade on this particular paper, since it is 25% of your grade, which is, like I said from the onset, it's a big chunk. It will either really improve your grade depending on what you make on it, or it's really going to damage your grade depending on how poorly you score, which we hope nobody does that. So this is basically parenthetical documentation and quotations 101, right? Methods of integrating quotations. One method that you can use is using a lead-in statement followed by a signal word, verb, phrase. And because we're using MLA, this signal verb, word, or phrase needs to either be in present tense or present perfect tense. Then you're going to follow it with a comma. So if you look here, here is sort of my lead-in statement. Here is my signal verb, and notice my comma. So based on the series of studies he has conducted, Dr. Benjamin Klein flatly states starch blockers are a fraud. So notice my lead-in, my signal verb, my comma, my quotation. Make sure that you use the open and then close quotation marks. Notice I do not have a period right here. There's no punctuation at all right here. The punctuation always goes at the end of your citation. In this case, you just want to put page. Just put the number. Don't do this. I see folks that like to do this. Page 62, or they put page period 62, or page comma 62, or they abbreviate period or comma. You don't need to do any of that. Just put the page number. And the only reason why we're using the page number and not last name and page number, and I'll show you about that here in a minute, is because we already mentioned our particular author of that source in our lead. So if you mention the author of your source in your lead, you do not have to mention the last name and page number again in the citation. It's just redundant. Make sure though that when you introduce your sources the first time, that you mention them by first and last name. After that, each time that you refer to them, you only need to refer to them by last name unless you got a source that has two sources with the same last name, and you have to sort of distinguish. Like if you have somebody with their last name Johnson, Ann Johnson and Ben Johnson, where you have to distinguish, you wouldn't just want to say Johnson because it could be either one of those two. Method 2. Embed the quotation within the grammatical structure of your own sentence. So if you look here, again, we sort of have a lead. This is the writer of this particular sentence. For Charles Dickens, the 18th century was both the best of times, there's a quotation, and the worst of times. And again, because they're quoting Charles Dickens, we just need the page number. And that's telling your readers that when they go to your Works Cited page, we should see an entry with Dickens. We should see an entry with Benjamin. Because if we want to learn more about that particular subject or area or whatever the case may be, we should be able to go to that source and look on page 62, and we will be able to find that quotation. Or look on page 35 and learn more about what Charles Dickens thought of the 18th century. That's the whole point. You're not only giving credit to those that deserve it, but you're also sort of contributing to the research community, meaning if somebody else in the audience would like to read more from Charles Dickens or more about, what Klein has to say about starch blockers, they can go back to your Works Cited page and look that stuff up and go to that page to see, what else are they saying. Method 3, using a lead-in statement followed by a signal word, verb, phrase, again, present tense or past or present perfect, then followed by either that or as with no comma. So anytime that you use that or as leading into your quotation, you do not need any type of punctuation. Notice Dr. Carl Smith has concluded that, and we get into our quotation. Again, only the page number because we have Dr. Smith, Carl Smith, first and last name at first, mentioned in our lead. You may be interested to note the bracket around the T here. That's indicating to your reader that originally on page 134 of this source, there was capitalized. So to show that, and to make the change because it has to fit the grammatical structure of your own sentence, we have to put around the T around brackets and make it lowercase. That's indicating to your audience that originally the T was capitalized, but because you're fitting it in your own particular sentence or paragraph, you have to make it make sense to the grammatical structure. So you have to lowercase it, and to make that, to show your reader and audience that you're making that change, you have to put it around the brackets. So you can't just do this because that's not showing ethics to that source, because you're basically saying that originally on 134 this was lowercase. Of course, if I looked up at that source and seen the capital T, I'd be like, oh, well, it wasn't originally lowercase. So they're doing something here without actually acknowledging that they're changing it. So that's why you need to do the brackets. The same thing would happen is if it was originally lowercase, then you needed it capitalized, then you would put obviously around brackets and you would capitalize the T. You do that anytime that you're going to make any particular changes to that quote that you're making, right? If you're changing verb tense, if you're adding certain grammar punctuation to the quote that needs, that type deal. Again, if you're unsure, send me drafts. Method 4, splicing or breaking up the quotation using a lead-in statement followed by a signal word, phrase, or verb, again, present tense or present perfect, then followed by a comma before and after the lead-in statement. So if you look here, this is my lead-in statement. It's in the middle. My quotation from this particular source is at the beginning, and then it's picked up again at the end here. But notice he was obeyed, all in quotation marks, comma. Notice the commas inside the quotation marks. And then we have writes Joseph Conrad of the company manager in the heart of darkness, comma, and then we pick back up with that quotation. We end, right, in quotation marks, and then again we have our citation, the page number, and then our final period. Method 5. When the signal is a complete sentence, meaning the sentence provides some information about the quotation to introduce it, use a colon to introduce your quotation and capitalize the first word of your quotation, especially if that quotation is a complete thought. So if you notice here, the author argues that there are many good reasons for consuming dark chocolate, colon. Then we have the open quotation marks, closed quotation marks, and our citation, followed by our final period. Notice here, because I said the author, I didn't mention the author's name in this case, I put the last name and then the page number. So if you don't mention the actual author's name in your sentence, in your lead-in to your quotation, then you need to put it in your parentheses here. Notice again, there's no comma. I see that a lot. I don't know why. I think that's more or less APA or Chicago or another style, but MLA, we don't use a comma there. So please, no commas. Unless you have more than one author. If you have more than one author, let's say you would say Smith and Jones. There's no comma. If you had 3 authors, Smith, comma, Jones, and Dunn, then you would have, because you're using a series, you have authors in a series, then you use the comma. Make sure that you spell out the word and. Don't do this. Don't abbreviate it. I see that a lot. MLA really doesn't like that at all. If you're using 4 or more authors, don't mention every author. Mention the first one. And then what you're going to need to use is this thing called at all, ETAL, period. That's telling your reader, when they look at that Works Cited page, they're going to know that it's Smith and 4+ authors that wrote that particular document. The same thing if you were going to introduce right here, you could put Smith, ETAL, but at that point you'd get rid of this because you wouldn't need that again. But just to show you, you wouldn't need to mention, 16 authors here, especially like with the medical journal. They tend to have a lot of authors. But when in doubt, ask, send drafts, send a example of what you're trying to do. Like if you're got a web page or a journal article that I can look at and you're having a hard time quoting that, I can work through a couple suggestions for you and we can see what would work the best. Method 6 is block quotation. What I would suggest with block quotations, you usually see block quotations used a lot with longer papers that are 15 pages plus. Our particular research paper only needs to be 6 to 8 pages. A lot of students like to use blocks because they're thinking, well, word count wise, I can use a whole lot of blocks and then I can fill up 6 pages in no time. The problem with block quotations, especially with novice writers, is they overuse them and they don't really set them up properly and they don't usually go through and dissect them like they should. I would say probably with this particular research paper, you could probably use 1, maybe 2. I wouldn't use more than 2. If you find yourself using more block block quotations, I would try to see if you can quote smaller versions using one of the 5 methods above. I would see if you can summarize or paraphrase, which we're going to talk about some of the methods below. Or, I would only use the block, where you think it would be necessary. And again, I probably wouldn't, honestly, with a 6 to 8 page paper, I'd probably only use one. And I'd probably put it maybe, like the middle of my paper. Because again, the deal with blocks is, as you can see here, we have this lead. Usually most block quotations are introduced with a colon. Notice the difference, the style. There's no open quotation marks. There's no closed quotation marks. You don't need quotation marks when you're blocking a quote. Now, let's say that this line originally had quotation marks in it, right? Sometimes you may find that where you have quotation marks that you're dealing with already in a particular source. So if there's already double quotation marks in your block, you're going to change that to single quotation marks. If that ever comes to be an issue. Otherwise, you're going to keep the grammar, for the most part, of that particular block the same as the original. Any changes that you make, you're going to put in brackets like I did here. Originally, the verb tense was different and I needed it more of a past tense in this case, so I had to make that change and show that with the brackets. Here, I'm fixing the actual grammar because a comma needs to go before and here because you have basically 2 complete thoughts. If they misspell a word, meaning whatever you're quoting from has a misspelled word, you can do a couple things. You can leave it and then put in parentheses this word sick, which is basically, it's a Greek word. You want to italicize sick, lowercase it. It's basically telling your reader and your audience that the original source made the mistake, not you. If you just leave it this way, without doing that, then I'm going to think you misspelled it and I'm going to count off for it. The other thing that you can do is you can correct the misspelling if you want to, but you're going to have to put that correction because you're making it around brackets. Notice the spacing. Everything is going to be double spaced. For the sake of space here, I didn't double space this, but MLA wants you to double space your entire paper, Works Cited, everything. But when we get to the block, notice my spacing. I'm tabbed twice each one of my lines because originally some folks would do this or they would do that, and that's wrong. So when you do it this way, I'm going to go ahead and double space it again. Each one of these lines has to be tabbed twice. So the quick, easy way to do it is you can highlight it and then go to your paragraph feature like I was showing earlier, go down to special and hit hanging. Well, it does it that way. You can highlight it and tab twice. That's probably the easiest way to do block quotations. Notice too, our period doesn't come after our citation at this point because in blocks, the period comes before the citation. And when you pick back up, you don't indent the next line. When you start to analyze this quote, you leave everything left aligned. And usually the general rule when you block a quote, you only block a quote when you're quoting 4 or more lines of prose writing. Since we're not really dealing with poetry or songs there, though, in case some of y'all are going to have to take English 1102, where you're going to get into that. If you're blocking more than or quoting more than 3 lines of poetry or songs, then you'd have to block it basically the same way. But here, the general rule for each line that you block, right? There's line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have to really talk in at least 6 lines or more what this quote means, right? Why is it important? You have to analyze it. You have to fit it into your particular major claims and statements and that type of stuff. That's really the proper way to introduce a block and to sort of go about talking about it and discussing it in your paper. So I would say the general rule for each line that you block, you have to at least give double that. So this was 6 lines, so you basically have to talk about this quote in 12 lines to really give a overview of this quote. The other thing that students like to do is they do these drive-by quotes, or they do these drop-in or ghost quotes. And what I mean by that is they don't even talk about the quote. They throw this up there and then they move on to their next point, and they just expect, well, the reader can read it, they can figure it out on their own, which in some point that is true. I can read this. I pretty much know what it would probably relate to as it relates to this particular paragraph and stuff, as it relates to Lord of the Flies, which is a novel. But your job is to bring in the material and then analyze it for me. You have to make it make sense to me, right? So just dropping in a quote and going on to the next topic is not good research. It shows that, well, you may know how to quote pretty good, but you don't really know how to analyze. And that's the point, right? Research paper is not only about research, but it's you analyzing that research throughout your paper. You giving me your interpretations, that type stuff, to see how it fits back to your major points, your topic sentences, your overall thesis statement, what your paper's about, that type stuff. What I would suggest, if you just think block quotations is going to be more of a pain for you, avoid them. Avoid them until you get a little bit more practice writing, maybe longer papers or something of that nature. But if you want to practice with 1 or 2, practice with 1 or 2. Again, I wouldn't give me 4 or 5 block quotations in the paper. The other thing is, you never want to begin a paragraph or end a paragraph with quotations of any type, whether it's a block or whether it's a short quotations. Quotations of your paragraphs usually come in the middle of your paragraphs. So keep that in mind. Don't begin a sentence or a paragraph with a quote, and don't end a sentence or a paragraph with a quote. Because when you do that, you're just sort of leaving your reader, it's like a cliffhanger, because you don't really go in and talk about what the importance of that particular quotation or passage means. Method 7 is paraphrasing. Generally, MLA would like you to do more paraphrasing than directly quoting. You only really want to directly quote from a source if what you're quoting is really important, meaning you can't paraphrase or do justice to that particular quotation in your own words without butchering it to death. So if you really need to quote something because the way the author or the source has it set up, the language is where it needs to be, then I would directly quote. If you can paraphrase stuff, meaning putting stuff in your own words, then I would try to paraphrase a good bit. And what I mean by paraphrase is you just don't want to go to the source and find synonyms and antonyms, because the only thing that you're doing is what happens when you're doing with that is you're creating patchwork plagiarism. You're only changing a couple words, but you're basically keeping the same gist. So when I say use your own words, you're really having to creatively think. You're taking what the author originally said and you're turning it into your own. But because the author actually came up with that idea, you still have to give the original author credit. So that's the reason here. So you want to be careful that you're not doing patchwork plagiarism when you're paraphrasing or summarizing, because in a lot of ways, paraphrasing and summarizing are um, interchangeable in a lot of ways. You want to paraphrase something that, if it's really kind of short, use your own language, use your own words. But again, at the end, we're putting the last name. If you don't mention who the author is in your particular paraphrase, and then of course you want to give the page number. Summarizing will come if like a block, if you find yourself wanting to block more, or if you found a particular journal article that's 20 pages long, but you really want to summarize what you found on page 13. You're not going to be able to quote or block the whole page 13. That would just be kind of one, it looked kind of weird on in a particular research paper, and two, it would just be, it's just laziness as it relates to research, because I'm giving you 8 different methods to use here. So when you find something that's going longer than maybe a block would go, or a couple paragraphs or a couple pages, then you can summarize what's going on. Again, you're using your own words. You want to be, equally careful that you're just not changing a couple things with the synonyms and antonyms from a dictionary at the source. You're actually using your own thought process to create this new condensed version of what you're summarizing. You still want to give credit to the particular author. In this case, we're looking at E.E. Cummings here. It's a poet. These really indicate line numbers and not page numbers, but it's the same process. Notice there's nothing quoted. There's no quotation marks in any one of these, paraphrasing or the summarizing, because you're using your own words. You don't need to use direct phrasing from that particular source. In a nutshell, that's the 8 methods you can use when it comes to integrating sources into the body of your research paper. What I would try to do, just to spice up your writing, is to use as many of these as possible. I would probably try to, stay closer to paraphrasing as much as you can and make sure that you're doing that correctly. And then I would probably use maybe one of these first 4 or 5 methods, interchangeably, spice it up a little bit. Don't just give me method 2 all the time, or don't just give me method 5 all the time. Mix and match the methods. That would make a better research paper. Look a little bit more polished, a little bit more scholarly in nature, because this is going to be a little bit different than maybe what you did in high school. High school, I hope, kind of taught you these 8 different methods. They might have not. If not, you're learning them now, because you're going to need to. This stuff that I'm teaching you now will be helpful for other classes where you have to write research papers, guaranteed. Even if you're transferring to another college, say Georgia Southern, that's in-state, public or private, doesn't matter. A research paper is a research paper. The only difference is really going to be your topic, the course, how long it needs to be, how many sources you need, and whether you're writing, the format in APA or MLA. If you're going out of state or overseas to another college, you're still going to have to use citation and properly document your particular paper. So all this stuff is going to be helpful moving forward. And then for those that have kids coming up through the public school system or the private school system, at some point they're going to have to write research papers too before they graduate. Now, since you know how to do it, you can sort of be the teacher and teach them how to do it properly too. So maybe when they go into college, they're not struggling maybe as you are with it now, because I taught you how to do it and you can teach somebody else how to do it. That's, again, good teaching, good research element right there in play in real life. Let's see. Get rid of this. Let's go back to the lessons real quick. if you notice, I moved some stuff. If you didn't get a chance to watch the lecture for week 10, the library orientation, it's still there. Week 11, the research paper, where I'll talk a little bit more about the actual research paper. Week 12, dealing with the annotated bibs. I also give you some web links here that talk a little bit more about integrating quotations. Talks about the Works Cited page. I believe I actually, maybe last week or maybe the week before, I sent out a email that has a whole list of documentation stuff, including the actual, somebody uploaded the newer MLA 9 handbook. It's fairly lengthy. It's like 500 pages. I don't expect that everybody goes and reads all 500 pages of that, but if you're coming across a issue about how to cite or how to quote and I'm not available at the time, you can kind of look through that, look through the index to see if you can find, because they cover pretty much every possible angle that you may run into. How to document a YouTube video, how to document a podcast, how to document a phone call, an interview, that type deal. The Dropbox is here for your proposal. It's due tomorrow by 11:59. Eventually, what I may do with some of these videos, instead of crowding each week's folder with the same video over and over again, I'm probably going to move this stuff to the week 14 folder, which is the Thanksgiving folder or Thanksgiving week folder. Remember, there's nothing really due that week, but just to stop crowding all the pages and all the folders, I'm just going to start moving older stuff in here. So in a week or so, if you need to go back and look at a week 10 or a week 11 video, whatever the case may be, they will be here. Let's see. The other thing I was going to say, week 12, if you noticed, I think I went ahead and deleted it. If you looked at the actual overview, there was a really good professional research paper that I gave to sort of for you to kind of read and look at and see how a professional would set this up. If you click on this, what the deal is, it's going to pop up originally. Well, and then at some point you're going to get this paywall. Don't buy anything. Just I will find another paper for you to kind of look at as it gets closer. Just don't worry about this reading is basically what I'm getting at, because when I designed this course back in August, this particular article was free, but now they want to charge. So don't pay it unless you just want to. As you can tell, it can get kind of pricey over a while. So, don't think that you have to buy stuff for this particular paper or for this class. You don't. The other thing I was going to look at real quick is the study guide. And again, this is 3 pages. It's a really good study guide. It's a good review for not only documentation, but also that last quiz coming up. Your particular quiz won't be this long. It's going to be shorter, but it's going to be sort of, I think I'm pretty much going to do a true-false quiz. And if it's false, you have to give the correct statement to make it true. If it's true, then you just leave it alone. So like here, it's talking about the acronym. What is MLA? It gives you sort of a multiple choice, and then it goes into the true and false. It talks about the Works Cited page. Again, that might be kind of a challenge in the way that, because if you use a Works Cited generator, a lot of this stuff that it's asking you to circle, they will do for you. but I did, provide in a weekly folder just some generic information about the Works Cited page in case you had to possibly do one of these from scratch at one point. Some more true and false, and then we actually get to the Works Cited. Be careful here, because I'm probably not going to ask you a whole lot of these on the actual quiz, maybe one or two, but what it's wanting you to do on this particular page, as it says on the sample Works Cited page shown below, indicate which type of source, that is, i.e. book, article, publication, website, each entry represents. So for our purposes, I just want you to, if you're going to work this out and send me your answers to check or whatever, look at it as either being a book, a journal article, or a website, because that's the 6 sources I want you to sort of, get for your own paper. So for example, if we look here and it's basically asking you, is it a book? Is it a website? Is it a journal article? Well, they give you a website. So that's telling me and telling you, it should tell you that it's a website. Same thing if we look down here at the Stephen Colbert, it says homepage. So even if they didn't have the web address with it, you should still be able to, make 2 to 2 together and say, hey, it's coming from a web page or a website. If we look at creation of the media, political origins of the media, notice the title is italicized. So going back to earlier in the video, anything that's in italics is either going to be a book, a film, or something longer than a journal article. So in this case, it's a book. And a lot of times this Huntington Mifflin here is a textbook provider or publisher for a lot of public school books. If you go up to this one where it says Anarchy at Sea, notice the title is in quotation marks. The actual place where it's coming from is Atlantic Monthly. It's in italics. That's the main publication of this. But we're focusing on the article here because it's in quotation marks. It's a journal article or a article. Where it becomes a little dicey is when you have articles that are in italics, but they give you a web address. So you can either say it's an article or you can say it's a web article, whatever floats your boat there. The next one, again, it's an article, but it's actually coming from one of our databases that we have, and they give you a website. So here what you can kind of say, it's a web journal article. The A14, keep in mind, most periodicals that you have daily in gas stations and grocery stores, and what I mean by periodicals means they're usually published daily or weekly or that, that nature. This is a classic example. Even if we didn't know that the New York Times is a newspaper, most newspapers, they have their page numbers this way, A14, B12, C34, whatever the case may be. So that would be, you could say article or you can say news article on that one. The other thing is, as you notice here, this is a book. Of course, in the title it says books. This is also a book because the title is italicized. But some folks would say, well, what's the 3 dashes in the period? Well, the 3 dashes in the period are basically telling your author or telling your reader and audience that it's the same author that you used above here. You used Art Vandelay. But instead of mentioning his name multiple times, you can bypass that by using the 3 dashes, the period, and then just listing everything else that comes after that. So if you find yourself having two sources by one particular author, mention the author first, but then use the 3 dashes in the period and then just mention the work. That way you're not having to write out the same author twice. If you use something John Smith, for a book and for a journal article, then you say Smith, John the first time, and after that you're going to just give me the 3 dashes and the period, and then list the different work. So again, this is a really good study guide. If you want to go through it and send me your answers, I'll check, make sure you're going on the right track, make sure you're getting them right. Your actual quiz will be shorter than this. So keep that in mind. The other thing is, I was talking about the Works Cited generators. This is one of many. It will help you not only with the annotated bib. If you look back at that particular lecture video over the annotated bib, I talk a lot more about these Works Cited generators. But one way that you can find them is just go to Google and type in Works Cited generator. And what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of pages. I would say Citation Machine is good. Create Citation. Make sure that once you create it, that you're using the proper format. Here, it's still an APA, so you'd want to go back and change that for MLA. It would give you that opportunity. It has the 3 main ones for websites, books, or journals, depending on your source. If you're using a different source, it has nearly 60 sources here that you can use. That will help you set your citation up correctly. I will say the free version is very addy, so there's going to be a lot of ads that pop up. What I would suggest is whatever Works Cited generator you choose to use, that you at least create a free username and password so you can kind of save your work if you're having to work, a little bit at a time on your annotated bib or your Works Cited page. Because unless you can get up there and do all 6 at once, like I did on my annotated bib lecture, what could happen is once you hit this X button, or once you log off or log out, whatever you had originally created is going to disappear because you never created a free account to save it. So that's going to be a pain because you're going to have to go back and redo everything over again. And that's going to be a lot of time wasted that you can be, doing other things. So, Citation Machine is good. EasyBib, I've used EasyBib when I was going in undergrad and graduate school. That's before some of these other ones. It's sort of the same setup as Citation Machine. It's addy though. I've been using the Scribber lately. It's really well. I think that's the one I used actually when I was doing that annotated bib lecture. But there's a lot of them down here. You can pick and choose which one you want to use. I would say whatever you choose, I would stick with it. You can go through the next page if you just want to try to play around with a few. I wouldn't, with this, at a certain point, it's going to start, being repetitive. So I would probably try to stay within the first 2 or 3 pages. You don't need to go to page 10. I mean, we can click on page 10. You can kind of tell a lot of the stuff is starting to be, it's either going to be repetitive or it's going to be useless for you. But you could probably find everything that you need or want as it relates to decent Works Cited generators on page 1 and within the first 3 or 4 hits. Otherwise, that's it for this particular lecture. Again, don't wait until the last minute to get started on the proposal, the annotated bib, or the actual drafting of the research paper. Don't wait until the last minute to get all 6 of your sources, because you're going to be sort of shooting yourself in the foot when the annotated bib is actually going to be due before the research paper. And you're going to want to take the next two and a half weeks to really read through and take notes and highlight the stuff that you want to use in textually, so you can style and create not only your Works Cited page, but you can get your actual quotations ready or paraphrasing ready to put throughout your paragraphs in the actual drafting of your research paper. So please, start sooner rather than later. Start sending drafts as soon as you can. Send as many as you can or want. The drafts are really optional, but I will tell you, just for teaching this class in the past, that the students that send drafts to me in Smart Thinking multiple times, and multiple times meaning more than 2 or 3, are the students that usually get the better grade, not only on that particular assignment, whether it's the annotated bib or the actual research paper, but they generally turn out to be the student that has the higher or the better grade in the class overall too, because the research element of this course is a lot different than what you did for the first 4 essays, because the first 4 essays were more, your opinion. You didn't have to add a lot of research unless you did start to add some for essay 3 or essay 4, but for the most part, we didn't have to document and create a Works Cited page of that type stuff. And again, those particular essays didn't count as much. I mean, they were, 10, 11, 12, 13%. This is a, collectively, when you add the proposal, annotated bib, and the actual research paper, all 3 of those things collectively are worth about 25% of your grade. So, not to discount what we did the first, 8 or 9 weeks. That's going to count and impact your grade too, depending on how well you did on those items. But the research paper, pretty much the whole month of November, that little sleeve of December, this is where it's going to determine the latter half of your semester grade and collectively your overall grade, the one that I'm going to officially send to the college by December 16th. So again, reach out if you need help. Most of y'all are going to know within a couple days. If you don't already know that you're probably going to need help with this particular assignment or assignments, the earlier you get the help, the better I can provide constructive feedback to help you. If you wait until something is due or a couple hours before something is due, chances are, because everybody else in my other classes are sort of waiting too, I may not be able to devote a good bit of the constructive criticism and the feedback as well as I could have had you sent that draft days or weeks earlier. So please don't wait till last minute. Don't procrastinate on this. Your health and your GPA will definitely be appreciative that you didn't. And if you go through the motions and go through the work ethic that you're going to have to put in to these assignments over the next couple of weeks, your grade should be pretty well on this assignment, I'm hoping. So I hope everybody has a good rest of the week. I hope y'all stay healthy, stay safe. Hopefully you don't get this common cold that's been going around, because it's kind of miserable. And just reach out when you need help. Have a great day. Have a great week. Have a great week next week. And I will talk to you everybody soon.